Alrighty, everybody. So, the Stanley Cup champion for 2023 has been crowned, and it is the Vegas Golden Knights. So, in the history of this channel, we've obviously covered 4 seasons of hockey coverage. We have covered Tampa Bay's back-to-back Stanley Cup championships. We covered the Avalanche's championship last year, and now we're covering Vegas's. It's been an absolutely amazing ride. I just want to say thank you all very much for the support this season. But anyways, let's get into the video. So, Vegas, Stanley Cup champions in their 6th season. Kind of surprising. I didn't think that they would get it this early, even though they had some really good success. I didn't think they get it this early, especially not with this roster. I thought rosters they had in the past were actually better than this year's. But of course, that was proved wrong. But Vegas, this year they went 51, 22, and 9 for 111 points in the regular season. They were first in the West, and on their journey to the Stanley Cup, they beat the Jets 4-1. They beat Edmonton 4-2. They beat, Dallas 4-2, and they beat Florida 4-1. So I want you guys to take into consideration there too is that two of those losses out of those, I believe, 8 that they had or 6 were overtime. So they only had 4 regulation losses throughout this entire playoffs, and it was really good. They played dominant the entire way through. And I mentioned in a number of videos talking about Vegas, saying that they could run 4 lines. And they are built to be a Stanley Cup team. They absolutely are. They're built in that way. And they have a really good core. They can run 4 lines. They have a great defensive core. They have great goaltending. Even though there are some questions surrounding them this coming offseason, they are in a really good spot right now, and they are no doubt a really good team, and they definitely deserve this Stanley Cup win 100%. So let's get into the players. The players are the biggest thing. Jack Eichel, 67 games played, 27 goals, 39 assists for 66 points during the regular season. And then in the playoffs, his first ever playoffs, he scored 6 goals, had 20 assists for 26 points in 22 games played. So again, Eichel, of course, this year was in his first full season with Buffalo, was traded from the first full season in Vegas, was traded from Buffalo last year, and he's played really well. He played really well this season with Vegas and was a big impact player on this team and definitely carried them through some of the stretches, and he doesn't get enough credit. Even though he didn't win the Conn Smythe, he definitely was a front runner for it, and he played a really good year, 100%. Jonathan Marchessault was up next there with 76 games played, 28 goals, 29 assists for 57 points in the regular season. But then in the playoffs, he had 13 goals, 12 assists for 25 points. And of course, he was the Conn Smythe MVP. So I thought Marchessault had a really good year. And of course, that jersey that's back there is actually his jersey. It was my 3rd ever jersey that I unboxed on this channel. So, of course, Marchessault had a really good season. And, in the playoffs, he had those games against Edmonton where he had a hat trick to move them on to the 3rd round. He scored in Game 6 to help the Vegas Knights win in round 3. And then, of course, he also scored, I believe, today, or I believe last night in Game 5 to help them win the Stanley Cup. So, of course, Marchessault had a really good playoffs. No question. Chandler Stevenson up next. And I've mentioned Stevenson is also a really underrated center that nobody really talks about. Does not get a lot of recognition there for Vegas. He played 81 games, had 16 goals, 49 assists for 65 points in the regular season. In the playoffs, he had 10 goals, 10 assists for 20 points in 22 games played. Stevenson, again, another underrated center. I believe that second-line center for that Vegas team, and is just a really good player overall. And nobody really talks about him because he's just on Vegas and he's so unknown, I guess. But Stevenson, deserving of a cup. Riley Smith was once again, along with Marchessault, was a misfit in Vegas. They were traded away from Florida to Vegas, and it's kind of ironic that they won the cups against them. Smith, 78 games played, 26 goals, 30 assists for 56 points in the regular season. And then in the playoffs, he had 4 goals, 10 assists for 14 points in 22 games in the playoffs. So, of course, Smith also had a really good playoffs as well. And again, you can see that there's not one person running away with it clearly. You got 26, 25, 24, 20 is your point leaders. And this is what I said. They're kind of the Western Conference version of the Carolina Hurricanes. They can play as a team. They run all 4 lines. They don't have one guy that's flying above everybody else and scoring all the points. No, they've played pretty much at the same level. And that's why the Conn Smythe this year was so questionable. They were like, well, who's going to win it this year? And of course, Marchessault took that one home. Alex Pietrangelo there on that blue line, 73 games played, 11 goals, 43 assists for 54 points. He had 1 goal, 9 assists, and 10 points in the playoffs. Of course, he had a solid playoffs. There were some controversy there with the hit on Draisaitl, but of course, he's won his second Stanley Cup. Of course, his first being with the St. Louis Blues a few years back. William Karlsson, 82 games played, 14 goals, 39 assists for 53 points in the regular season. In the playoffs, he had 11 goals, 6 assists for 17 points. Of course, Karlsson was once again another Golden Knight misfit, was selected in the expansion draft, proved to be a really solid player with Vegas. Of course, scored 40 goals in his first year, was never going to reach that peak again, but he's certainly done a good job since then. Shea Theodore, 55 games played, 8 goals, 33 assists for 41 points. He had 1 goal, 12 assists, and 13 points in the playoffs. Theodore battled through cancer. I think it's great for him to reach this milestone, 100%. And then finally, your final guy in the forward core is Mark Stone. And you guys thought I wasn't going to mention him. No, I figured I'd leave him for last because he played the least amount of games in the regular season. And he faced a lot of injury issues. He faced 2 back surgeries in the past year. Yet he still came in, played in the playoffs, played well in the playoffs, and won the Stanley Cup. 43 games played, 17 goals, 27 assists for 38 points. He had 11 goals, 13 assists, 24 points in the playoffs, and was the first person to hold up that Stanley Cup for Vegas. So definitely, Mark Stone is an amazing captain. They gave up pretty much nothing for him. I remember that trade. I wish I was making YouTube videos for that, but I was not, but of course, Mark Stone, really solid forward this year in the playoffs. Of course, you can't forget about any of these guys either. And guys like this really help out your team as well in the playoffs. Ivan Barbashev, a deadline acquisition. He had 7 goals, 11 assists, 18 points in the playoffs. Nicholas Waugh was acquired for virtually nothing back in 2019, I believe. He was traded for Eric Haula. Waugh, 3 goals, 8 assists, 11 points. Brett Howden, traded for nothing in the offseason. 5 goals, 5 assists, 10 points. Amadio, signed for nothing. 5 goals, 5 assists, 10 points. Those guys are your key players. You need players like that to win in the playoffs. And I didn't even mention all the guys that were key contributors, like Keegan Colasar was another big one. Zach Whitecloud, Alec Martinez. There's so many other ones that have proved to be huge scorers for Vegas in this year's playoffs. And those are just to name a few. Like, I love looking at Cup teams every year because everybody gets pointed out as a player that helped out that team win the Stanley Cup. 100%. Goaltending was where there was a lot of stuff that happened, and there was a lot of questions for me when it came to goaltending in the playoffs because you had so many options. You had Laurent Brossoit, you had Jonathan Quick, you had Adin Hill, you had Logan Thompson, and you also had Robin Lehner on the backup end. So that's 4 goalies right there, or 4 technical goalies that were on your roster, and 5 in the organization overall. But Adin Hill and Laurent Brossoit were the ones that got the opportunities. Hill, 27 games played, 16, 7 and 1, a 2.50 goals against average, and a .915 save percentage in the regular season. However, in the playoffs, he had an 11 and 4 record, a 2.17 goals against average, and a .932 save percentage. Yeah, I thought Hill had a really good year. And as somebody who was a fan for him in the Arizona Coyotes a few years back, and has just always been a supporter of him, it makes me really happy to see him hold up a Stanley Cup 100%. Laurent Brossoit as well was the other goalie there. With 11 games played, a 7-0-3 record, a 2.17 goals against average, and a .927 save percentage. In the playoffs, he had a 5-2 record, a 3.18 goals against average, and a .894 save percentage. Of course, though, he got hurt, which is where Adin Hill had to come in. So yeah, congratulations to the Vegas Golden Knights on winning the Stanley Cup. The 4th Stanley Cup I've covered on this channel. But thank you all very much for the support this season. I really do appreciate it. This was a hard year. We weren't able to make as many videos as I'd like to, but we still grinded it out. We still grinded and worked for it. But I'm proud of what we did this year, and I'm hoping that next year will be an even harder year, and we'll get even better. But anyways, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to leave a like and the subscribe button down below. I greatly appreciate it. We'll move into the draft type stuff now. Look at prospect previews, all that good stuff. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.